Lines continue service to Cuba. Senator Marco Rubio is one of the local lawmakers who led the way for this policy change.
And we're happy he can join us this morning live to talk about that and a whole lot more. Senator, thanks for joining us. And of course, happy Father's Day to you. We know you have 4 little ones keeping you very busy.
Yeah, they're not that little anymore either. Yeah. So I'm almost a senior in high school now. So it's, yeah. Thank you, though, and a happy Father's Day to everyone watching.
Well, Senator, you played a key role in the president's announcement on Friday, changing this policy. Can you take us behind the scenes, give us a little bit more of an understanding of how this all came about over the last few months?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We kind of said, look, there's a policy in place by the previous administration. Let's look at it. Whether we were for it or against it, if there's anything positive that came out of it, let's keep it. And if there's anything negative, let's get rid of it. That was the starting point. The president really wanted to do this. And so our aim here is simple. If Americans are going to travel to Cuba, we want to make sure that as much of their money is going into the hands of individual Cubans who own these small businesses, and less of it is going into the hands of the military that's trying to take control of the entire economy. So that was the behind it. And there's a lot of talk out there about individuals not being able to go to Cuba. That's not accurate. There's a category called support for the Cuban people that will allow people to go to Cuba as individuals. However, they're going to have to do things that help people become independent of the government. So, for example, shop, eat, and stay at small businesses owned by individual Cubans, not by the military. For example, Airbnb.
So, but Senator, how are they going to be able to regulate that as well? He says he wants the money to go directly to the Cuban people, but eventually that money, they will be spending it in Cuba and going to the government. So how will that be able to be regulated?
Well, I mean, to some extent, we have to understand that's true no matter where you are in the world. I mean, if you travel to the United States as a tourist or as a visitor and you stay at a hotel, the money's going into the hotel, but that hotel pays taxes and local regulatory fees and the like. Now, what we're talking about is not going into a Cuban-owned resort, but a government-owned, military-owned resort. And how do you regulate it? The current law, as it exists today, as it existed under the Obama administration, required visitors to Cuba to have an itinerary and keep records for 5 years of what they did while they were there. So the way they're going to regulate it is the way we use our tax code, and that is audits. They're not going to audit every trip, but they're going to selectively audit trips the way you would audit tax returns to ensure compliance. That's the way you do it.
What does this mean for Cuban exiles, Senator?
Well, it doesn't really impact what Cuban Americans are doing. They'll be able to continue to travel and visit their relatives in Cuba. They'll be able to continue to send money. What they will not be able to do is travel to Cuba and to visit relatives, but spend a week and a half or 2 weeks at a military-run resort.
And what's been the talk with the Cuban exiles here? I mean, the president said while he was running his campaign, this is what he was going to do, and he's setting out, and he is doing it. But are we really going to see a change within the next few years?
Well, that belongs to the Cuban government. They've got to now step forward and say, we're going to allow private individual Cubans to own more businesses. You're going to have Americans coming off cruise ships. You're going to have Americans flying in on airplanes with money in their pockets ready to spend, but they can't spend it with the military. And so will the Cuban government now allow individual Cubans to open up more businesses? You know, 2 of the top, highest-ranked small little restaurants that the people, paladares as they call them, that people were running out of their own homes, were just closed down by the Cuban government because they do not want individual Cubans to own too many businesses. They don't want individual Cubans to be able to earn a living independent of the government. That's how they keep control of them. So now it's up to the Cuban government to allow the Cuban people to be able to open up more businesses and make a living for themselves.
If we could turn to another topic, Senator, you serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Are you concerned that President Trump still refuses to accept that the Russians try to interfere with our election?
Yeah, I disagree with him on that assessment, and I think everybody else basically in government does as well. And my hope is that eventually, at some point, the president will come to that conclusion as well. Suffice it to say that our job continues. We're going to continue to look at the entire 2016 election. We're going to put out a report that tells the American people how the Russians interfered in our election, the methods that they used, because we're going to have an election in 2018 and 2020 and 2022, and they're going to keep trying to do this. And the best thing we can do for the American people is to lay out a report that details how they did it, so we're prepared for the next time.
And Senator, the shooting last week, do you think it will have an impact on our political discourse?
Well, obviously, it's a tragic shooting, and I wish it wouldn't have happened, but I hope so. And there's a lot more at play here than just political discourse. I mean, we've come to a point in this country where free speech is under assault, not legally, but culturally. You now see people boycotting speeches, graduates turning their on speakers that they don't agree with. The violence is the alternative to speech, and so we've got to continue to be a country where people can disagree without hating the person. We've got to walk away from this idea that we're not going to argue about your policies. I'm just going to go straight and try to delegitimize you as a person and claim that you're evil. Because once you go around telling people that someone is evil, the next step is someone out there who's unstable will determine that they are justified in eliminating an evil person through violence. And both sides are to blame. The media amplifies it. Our culture itself has fallen into all of this. I hope it's a wake-up call, but I think it's going to take, unfortunately, more than this tragedy. I think we're going to have to put the time and energy into realizing that we cannot continue to speak in these ways.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for your time. And again, happy Father's Day. You have a very busy day ahead of you, so thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And still ahead on